Oh. Welcome back, and we move to our next session, also a very interdisciplinary session. The first speaker will be Professor Adam Jatowt from the University of Innsbruck. He is a professor at the Computer Science department, and his talk is about novel information retrieval and knowledge discovery approaches. Adam, please share your slides. We are recording it, and we will also make the slides available. Adam, please go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to present here. My name is Adam Jatowt. I'm from Innsbruck University. And the talk here will be rather different than previous talks, but I hope that equally interesting for you. And I will not show too many equations or some technical details, just to focus on the main story or main research ideas that we research here. So let me start with the background. We have a lot of document archives accumulated these days because of continuously generated online content and also analog content being digitized these days by many memory institutions. So you have like newspaper archives, book archives, even some web archives or social media archives and so on. And of course, they span different types of documents. They are continuously growing to the point we can even talk about big archival data. And they are becoming more and more accessible to the users. Just to show some numbers, like millions of newspapers you can see are accumulated, for example, in Chronicling America initiative or the Times Digital Archive, Internet Archive, which has a lot of past versions of web pages, already, I think, over 16 or 15 petabytes of data. And so on. And then every big national library or archive have their own digital collections where a lot of budget is spent. Like you can see some example numbers here for Japanese National Diet Library. But unfortunately, the number of users is rather small for all this accumulated data. And our objective of this research is to popularize archives because they are basically our heritage. Cultural heritage by making them more useful and interesting for average users, not only for professionals. And I probably don't need to talk much about the importance of history. We all know that this is something that is taught already in elementary schools and onwards, necessary for citizens to be members of the society and act responsibly. And these days, just to give more context, there are a lot of computational approaches being used to history science. There is a term, digital history, a part of digital humanities, which is basically using computational methods to support not only analysis of history, writing, but also dissemination and basically sharing. So in our research, we try to find the ways how to effectively extract information from these archives, document archives that I just previously show some examples, and what are the novel ways to utilize such a heritage that we have. Unfortunately, the current interfaces to document archives, for example, like newspaper archives, are basically working the same way as search engines that we use daily. The user might have a query, and then the search results are returned, but these search results come from different time periods typically, and require a lot of reasoning and knowledge for the user to make sense of them or organize them and so on. So we think that more user-friendly solutions could be provided here. And I want to show basically 4 research topics that we were working recently on this goal to popularize and make more accessible our cultural heritage. Starting with question answering, then more more novel approaches like temporal analogy inference or IR, information retrieval by contemporary relevance, and then even information retrieval by measure of interestingness, which we model by surprise estimation. Sorry. So let me start with very briefly with direct question answering that we worked on. Question answering is a field in computer science that takes as an input any natural question, natural language question, and provides just the answer. However, most of the approaches are working on Wikipedia or on the web. There are now specific approaches that could be utilized for archives, like news archives. And we're seeing that successful solutions for answering questions about the past from long-term news archives could be useful for many professionals, lawyers, historians, journalists, even writing about current stories, but maybe wishing to relate them to the past, or even employees from insurance, finance fields to basically learn from the past. As well as for average users that could be interested in retrieving some information. And they are example of the questions here you can see in this table that our system tries to answer. For example, what bill was signed by Clinton for firearms purchases, or which party threatened to boycott the South African elections and was led by Buthelezi, and so on. And here are the answers that are supposed to be delivered by the system. And also we show here event dates that these questions relate to. So in essence, we are building a system that takes a query from the user, for example, like this, who replaced Goss as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And our system, question answering system, which we call CANA, is taking the answer from a large news archive. Typically, we work on the New York Times that spans about 20 years and has close to 2 million news articles. The answer could be like this, directly returned to the user. But of course, the challenge here is, given typically millions of past documents that are in the archive, how to select a small subset of these that are most likely to generate the answer. Then we could utilize standard question answering methods, but we first need to find some subset of articles that are likely to contain the answer. And I will skip here all this, all the details of the method that we use here, and I will just focus on extracting so-called time scope for questions. So if you have a question like this one, for example, Lewinsky told whom about her relationship with President Clinton, we would like to basically zoom in on the timeline to a certain period that this question relates to. Of course, we don't utilize any external sources besides our archive, so no Wikipedia or nothing else. And we can still find the time period that the question relates to by looking at the distribution of documents returned for this query. I mean, a query that is taken from this question. And then we can draw this distribution here, find some peak like indicated by red color, and probably this is the period that the answer lies, and we could analyze documents that only are published over there. Of course, these are simple cases. You might have an example of questions like these ones that generate kind of peaky distribution over time of the relevant documents. And if we take their basically period of peaks, we will have a couple of periods then that we can take many news articles from. We would need to rank them in some way and extract answers from some top ranked, perhaps 10 or 15 news articles. So we rely, in short, on time series analysis, finding first bursts for a certain question that is, of course, converted to the query, and looking at the temporal distribution of news articles. And then there are many other steps, but I will skip them in order to move to next topics. Just I will show only some results that we did on this New York Times corpus. We manually prepared 1,000 of questions about history. 500 of them contain temporal expression already in the question. which are easier, of course, and 500 are without any temporal hints. So basically, it's just a text, no date in the question. And then our system Kana had better precision in answering questions than some baseline systems, and even then the system which is utilizing Wikipedia. So we also tested the case where we try to answer these 1,000 questions from Wikipedia. Maybe the answer is recorded there. But actually, in some cases, yes, but in many cases, there was no answer in Wikipedia. So we conclude that this kind of question answering from archives provides some complementary knowledge in many cases to potential questions. And the questions we took were from some existing data sets or from historic quiz websites and some other specialized websites. So that was about question answering research that we continue doing. Another research was about entity retrieval. Entity retrieval means that a query is one entity and the system extracts some other related entities. But in our case, rather than designing solutions for web or for Wikipedia, we focus on the archive. So basically on the so-called temporal analogs, where the query might be an object from the present, like this one, USB or iPod or smartphone, or even an object from the past, if we reverse the case. And the answer should be similar object from the past, right? So like Walkman, floppy disk, maybe pager. Of course, sometimes there is not just one possible answer. There might be several, and situation is not that clear-cut. But we pose this research as an IR problem, that we return a ranked set of answers, and those at the top are probably most relevant, but there could be other relevant at the top as well. So it's not like one-to-one mapping in our setup. But here we just show one-to-one cases for simplicity. So if I enter to the system something like a USB stick, I would like to have the answer floppy disk, for example, for a certain period of time. That also could be specified. And if we look how to do it automatically, that is not so simple, because if I analyze, for example, the top co-carrying terms to the Walkman, taken from, let's say, 80s, from newspapers written in 80s, and top co-carrying terms to iPod, you can see that the overlap of these top terms is very small because the technology advanced so much. Only maybe word music is identical. So how to find a mapping that iPod is indeed similar to Walkman is not trivial, obviously. That's because everything changes, especially in technology that really quickly changes. So the task is not trivial. But if we look more carefully, we can find some solutions or potential ways, like Apple as a producer of iPod could be equated to Sony at the time, sole producer of Walkman, or cassette and tape are data placeholders, same as MP3 right now, right? So we could do some reasoning to establish similarity between iPod and Walkman. And we basically, the solution was based on transformation of vector spaces. These days in NLP, we model the semantic meaning of words as a point in multidimensional vector spaces. And we basically put a hypothesis that relations between similar objects in the present are same as in the past. So we look at the relational similarity. Again, I will not show the details here because that's too much for the short presentation, but I will show you the demo system that was built working also on New York Times corpus, so the 20 years like here. And in this demo, you can see results for the query euro. And we also specified that the aspect for this query, because euro have many meanings like Eurocup and so on, the aspect is currency, right? So we want to find analogs of a euro as a currency in the past. And you can see the results in a bold font like francs, Belgian francs, lire. Other results are not so good, but those at the top are make sense. And also there is a sentence that contain the result taken from some news articles. And of course, you can input any other query and specify the aspect and see similar analogical entities from the past. And what we observed also is that if we use another archive like Times archive that spans 200 years, there are too many problems with OCR errors. For example, there was a query car, and we looked for a corresponding term from beginning of 20th century. And what we found was these ranked items like vehicle, tricycle, and then you can see there are some errors. So we provided also OCR error correction module so that the results were more clean and also more reliable. But this error correction, of course, it's rather simple. There are many other solutions to correct OCR errors, but in our case, we just utilize word embeddings and some simple rules. But they were working in many cases quite well. So the third research that we do in the direction of making archives more usable and interesting for the users is information retrieval by contemporary relevance. So typically information retrieval is done just by relevance, which means you find documents that are relevant to the query. But we propose a term called contemporary relevance, which means the returned documents, for example, news articles, should be related to user query, but at the same time, they should be related to basically present times, the time when the user is at. So if I issue a query like economics to the archive, I want to find some news articles about economics, I might see these two documents, but you can see that the bottom document mentions Donald Trump. Actually, both of them were in the end of 1980s. So we could conclude that probably for average user, the second document, the bottom document, is probably more interesting because it's about major entity that is popular these days. And this was our idea to re-rank results so that not only they are relevant to the query like economics, but also that have something to do with the present days. So could be more attractive for the user, for example, for a journalist writing some story on the present day events and wanting to connect to the past. And we use a learning to rank approach with many features. One feature was the name entity like Donald Trump or this IRA name mark here, how popular they are these days, or how popular are the events described in the past articles at current time. And many other aspects were also utilized. And in the whole learning to rank framework, we could return these documents ranked by so-called contemporary or maybe present relevance for a given user query. One of the methods that we utilize here was transformation of embedding vectors similar to the previous research that I show, and also word movers distance. So the example would be like this. If you have a sentence in the past, like Clinton speaks to the media in Illinois, we could find that this is similar to the sentence at present, like Trump greets the press in Chicago, because we have all this mapping between and transformation between embeddings of Clinton and Trump and press, media, Illinois and Chicago, and can find the best mapping that is minimizing the distance between these kind of words. So this technology was also utilized to find past articles that would be relevant to these days articles. And this is the last research that I want to briefly show. This is the latest work, and it's about interestingness measure that we try to incorporate to the search in archives. And we were thinking what it means, interestingness. Of course, this is very complex construct, and there could be many psychological or sociological theories here. Content could be interesting because it relates to user interest or hobbies, or is about important events these days, or is just written in a captivating way, or is educational, teaches some lesson, and so on and so on. But what we focused at is one notion of interestingness, which is related to surprise, to unexpectedness. We wanted to find something that is surprising from the past just because the time passed, and it's no longer maybe a typical situation for us. So something shocking, surprising from the past that a user could relate to it, like, did you know that in the past something happened? And I will show you some visual examples first to maybe give a idea what we mean by surprise here. Let's say ice cutter. Typically, people might be thinking about ice cutter like this machine, but maybe not many, especially young users, know that in the past, ice cutter was actually a job, and people on the frozen lakes or rivers were cutting it and quickly taking by a truck to some restaurants and other facilities. Another case could be this advertisement, which is about cosmetics containing radium. At that time, people were thinking that radium is good for skin. It makes the skin shiny and maybe cleaning it in some way, as you can see advertisement here. Also using radium for plates of clocks and for some other lighting maybe purposes. Another example is this advertisement of a doctors that encourage to smoke, for example, camels, or this kind of strange picture with a woman in T-shape here image. This is against our common sense these days and rather surprising to us. So how to return this kind of content? Of course, we didn't focus on images because we mainly work with text. Images perhaps could be researched in another way. We basically take the content from the past and some representative content from the present. Basically, these are news articles collections, and we build a large graph that contains two subgraphs. And each node here was a sentence. In another variant, a node was a topic. And there was edge connecting nodes as a similarity of nodes. But the edges between these two subgraphs were based on dissimilarity. So the idea in this representation was to find content from the past, which is very common, so it is kind of popular, but different from the present. And for this, we use mutually recursive random walk, something like PageRank, basically scoring of nodes in the graph based on their popularity and similarity to other nodes in the graph. But in our case, it was also dissimilarity to the present graph. And I will not bother you with the techniques here. I'm free to, you are free to contact me if you want more details. I will just show some examples taken from New York Times archive from the year 87 and 88. For example, a sentence like here that says that Prime Minister of Japan was accusing Toshiba company of betraying Japan by selling military sensitive technology to Soviet Union. Okay, maybe that is not very much surprising, but it's interesting to maybe contrast this sentence with similar cases these days, but actors would be different, perhaps USA and some other country. And it's interesting, I think, wording here that betraying Japan as a company and selling to Soviet Union. Another example is information about laptop. You can see the word like battery operated, so emphasizing that laptops have a battery, and even a laptop written with this hyphen here as kind of thing on the labs actually, and then a lunchbox sized, emphasizing it, and 14 pound, which could be more than 6 kilo package, right? So in the technology, we found a lot of this kind of surprising, interesting information that the user could read and perhaps ponder on the evolution of technology and so on. Imagine that we could put these sentences perhaps on some gateway, like a website to the archive, to encourage users to do browsing by picking up something interesting and showing them what is there. And my favorite example is this last sentence saying that there were apartment fires in Moscow because of the exploding TV sets. That was because of the poor level of Soviet technology. Something very maybe shocking, because if we talk about explosion in case of TV, that's often about the movie, but not about TV set itself. And it relates to me because as a grandchild of my grandmother, whenever I was visiting her house, she often warned me not to sit too close to her TV set because it may catch fire. And I was very surprised at the time. I didn't really believe in it. But now doing this research and having found this sentence, I understood that she was actually right. The Russian TV set she had was not that safe. So with this, I want to just conclude and tell that objective of our work is to improve or extend means of information retrieval and knowledge extraction from archives, like document archives, which are continuously growing, which represent our heritage. And the approaches that I proposed and showed to you today are like this: question answering, finding analogical entities, and then returning documents that have some relation to the present times, and finally finding surprising information from the past. And we are still continuing this work. This is just the beginning, but I think this work shows some good direction. So I'm happy to answer if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. The floor is open to questions. Wouter van Alteveld has a question.
Yes, thank you. I do have one question. I love the research you're doing on the collections from New York Times and other big archives. I do research on those kind of archives myself, and one of the things I encounter is that it's really hard to share the data even between collaborators. You cannot publish the data, which makes it difficult to do open science. And I was wondering that maybe from your discipline, you have a different idea about how to deal with these issues of working with proprietary data, where maybe one of the biggest problems is that you just can't even get the data on your hard drive in a full size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very important question. We just purchase basically these data sets and we can return data from it. I believe that some of these articles may be, well, behind copyright because of the age. But it is still a gray zone. To what extent we can present the results? Because if we extract some sentence, well, that could be copyright violation, especially for newer newspapers, for example. And also these data sets were already compiled by certain companies that they are selling them exclusively. It's a problem. We think that these solutions could be utilized by museums and archives, for example, to the portals leading to the data. So not by external entities, but those entities that already have the data with themselves. We, for example, cannot make such a service without getting any permission before. Well, it's an open question, I would say, not easy to answer, but a good one.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? If not, I would like to move to the next speaker, Wouter van Alteveld. We are talking a lot about cross-disciplinary work, but Wouter is that in person. He, if I remember correctly, because I do it just from memory, but he has a computer science master degree. Then he moved to the Faculty of Social Sciences, ultimately as an assistant professor. And now he has moved recently